Okay, first off, David, one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview is I was asked before the film, before I'd seen the film, and I said, I don't know, let's sort of see, because a lot of times people aren't that interested in directors. I am, but the general audience is.
Yeah.
We're a mainstream commercial radio station here. After I saw it, I immediately texted Jamie, "Hey, I love the interview, David. I really like the movie, so I'm looking forward to this interview." But the first thing I wanted to ask you, is do you like talking about this movie? And the reason I ask is the film itself is so reticent. I was wondering how you feel about just this process of talking about a movie that is, in a lot of ways, very quiet.
Oh, it's a very quiet movie, and I think over the course of this interview, I'll probably say more words than there are in the entire film.
Yes.
I probably already have. But yeah, I do enjoy talking about it. It's an interesting thing because for me, making the movie was such a instinctive and organic process. I didn't really think too much about it while we were making it. And so now the process of talking about it allows me to sort of kind of come to terms with what it is we've made and also understand it better, because if someone were to ask me what does it all mean or what do you hope audiences take away from it, I don't have those answers yet. I'm still figuring it out for myself.
Is that right? Okay,
Yeah.
well that's good to hear.
When I was little and we used to move all the time, I would write these notes and I would fold them up really small and I would hide them.
What did they say?
They were just like things I wanted to remember, so that if I ever wanted to go back, there'd be a piece of me there waiting.
Did you see too much? All the awful dreams felt real at night. Did you know that she waking up? Did she die in the night? Leave you alone.
What is it you like about this house so much?
History?
No place like home. That's a business.
A writer writes a novel. A songwriter writes a song. We do what we can to endure.
She finds someone else. Leave me
We build our legacy piece by piece, and maybe the whole world will remember you, or maybe just a couple of people, but you do what you can to make sure you're still around after you're gone.
So the first thing I want to talk about, I think one of the most striking aspects of this movie is, I'm not quite sure what the word is, if it's pacing or tempo, but there's something very definite and unusual about the timing aspect of this movie. Can you sort of talk about how deliberate it is or exacting? How do you explain or I think explain, let's go with explain.
Yeah.
Explain the kind of pacing the movie has.
It is a very deliberately paced movie. I think every movie has an intrinsic rhythm to it, and if you are making the movie right, telling the story properly, you'll find that rhythm.
Okay.
I come from an editorial background, so the rhythm at which a film is edited together is very important to me, and I hate it when movies that need to be slow cut through things too quickly, or movies that are like 3 hours long that should be 90 minutes long. I think we've all seen those movies where like this, come on, move it along.
Yeah.
With this film, because there was no one asking for it, I made it for myself, and I was hoping people would enjoy it. I knew that I could just let it be whatever it needed to be.
Okay.
And one thing that I enjoy are movies that linger on ideas or images, or often the images contain those ideas, and let you process them at not your own pace, because that's still, the movie will cut to the next shot or the next scene when it's time to, but you will have time to linger with them. I really enjoy films where you might be looking at one shot for so long that your mind wanders to a completely different space, completely leaves the realm of the movie theater, and then comes all the way back to the movie, and you're still looking at the same shot. That's something I enjoy. I love having that experience.
Is that right?
And so with this film, I knew that it was a type of movie, because so much of the movie is about time.
Yes.
Where we could do that, where we could use time in unusual ways and give audiences an experience that is quite different from what you're going to see anywhere else in the cinemas this summer, but that if you approach it on its own terms and let the movie work the way it's supposed to work, will provide an experience that is very fulfilling, I think. And for me, it's the type of movie that I can get lost in more easily than most, because it does give you that sort of meditative experience.
Perfect. And so then I was wondering, especially in the first maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so, it feels to me like you're deprogramming the audience, because you're breaking down their expectations. Like, no, this is not moving. I mean, this is a stationary shot of, say, a house.
Yes.
And it's like you're training the audience to watch how to watch your movie. Do you think that's fair?
That's absolutely true. I think every movie does that to a certain extent, and this one probably more so than others, because you do need to, if you were to walk out of Transformers 5 and say, hey, this is a ghost movie, let's go see that next.
Yeah.
You would need some time to figure out what it is you're watching, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we do that both with the pace. Like, it starts off, things are moving like relatively normally, but then all of a sudden, like you say, we cut to this house, and all of a sudden we're just looking at it for a long time.
Yeah.
And you're waiting for something to happen, and then nothing does, and that's teaching you how to watch the whole movie. But also the fact that the movie is in 4:3 does that early on. You say, you go see a movie, normally you're expecting a widescreen image.
Yeah, so explain what 4:3 is.
It's the traditional, it's a square. It's basically just a square. The traditional Academy ratio is 1:3:1. Most movies are 1:8:5 or 2:3:5, which on a television would amount to 16:9 or maybe a little wider than that.
Right.
And so we're presenting this movie in a square.
Yeah.
And that was something that I wanted to do both thematically, because it kind of constrains the image, and the movie's about a character who is, for all intents and purposes, trapped in a box. And also because it would telegraph to audiences from the get-go that this is going to be slightly different. The first image you see on screen is a little different than what you're used to.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It establishes a formal aesthetic right off the bat. And I
Yes.
think, and I love that about the movie. And then it's interesting that you mentioned this, like, it's as long as it needs to be. When you're a filmmaker, how do you determine, what if, for instance, the shot of that stationary house, and the important thing about this house is it's not extraordinary. It's not like, oh, it's got so many interesting architectural curlicues. No, it's really about the fact that it's just a static shot of it. How do you determine, as the filmmaker, how long is too long or not too long? I mean, it could have gone another 30 seconds. It could have gone 30 seconds shorter. How did you determine that? That seems trickier.
You just sort of feel it out. Like, it really comes down to just watching it and hitting the space button to stop it and say, okay, that's where we're going to cut.
Okay.
And the funny thing is that, when you are making like, the previous movie I made was a big Disney movie. On that movie,
Pete's Dragon.
it was, a kind of film where you need to, embrace all audiences. And so there are scenes in that movie that are faster than I would like or slower than I would like, and you do that because you go to test screenings and you read the audience.
Right.
You kind of like say, okay, people are getting bored here, I love this shot, but let's cut it shorter. And that is a fine thing for a film like that to do. You need to do that. But for this film, it was just me. It was like, what would make me happy as an audience member?
Yeah.
And when am I tired of looking at the shot? When am I ceasing to get information from the shot? And when that happens, that's my cut.
Perfect. Okay. We're kind of dancing around what the movie really is about, but I'm doing that intentionally. I like the kind of the formal aspects of it. I also then now want to ask you about your choice of your ghost depiction.
Yeah.
How did you do? I mean, that is, the poster, that image is so perfect. And basically, it is as low grade as you can imagine. We live in a world of CGI. We could have the most unbelievable 15-dimensional ghosts if we wanted to. The fact that you have basically a bedsheet with holes, I think, just on the face of it, whatever kind of bedsheet it was, and whatever kind of holes for the eyes there were, it would be startling. But how did you decide on exactly that kind of bed sheet, the kind of weight that bed sheet has, where the eyes were positioned? How did you decide on all those very formal matters?
It was a really challenging process. That I want to give all the credit to my costume designer, Annelle Broder, because I called her and said, hey, I'm going to make this movie, and it's going to be a ghost movie, but the ghost is just going to be a guy with a sheet over his head. It'll be easy. It won't be hard at all.
Right.
And so she tried that. She cut holes in a sheet and threw it over someone's head to see what it looked like, and it looks terrible. It doesn't look the way you think it's going to look.
Yeah.
And you see it on a kid at Halloween, and it's charming. You're like, oh, that kid's a ghost. But when you think about the image, the graphic, it has the potential to be incredibly striking, but if you just put a sheet over someone's head, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we, or she, I should say, came up with this concept where there are a lot of layers under there to give it shape. There's a helmet to kind of hold the face in place so that the eyes will always be in the right spot, and so that they'll have that depth to them. And there are several layers of petticoats underneath the sheet so that the shape of the sheet flows out in the right proportions, and then also with a wire around the base so that it stays away from the actor's feet, so you don't wind up tripping over your own sheet. And so it's all that stuff, and then the sheet itself was still just a traditional bed sheet.
Okay.
But so that was the original idea. It was like it should just be a traditional bed sheet, but it had all these other bells and whistles to make it feel as simple as it looks.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things I'm imagining is with the eyes. Those eyes, you don't need those big. The holes are bigger than the human eye needs.
Yeah.
But they become expressive because they are the size they are.
Exactly. It's almost like a caricature or a cartoon, like where you just need everything to be a little bit more exaggerated. Like you wonder why Disney movies, the cartoons, the characters always have gigantic eyes, and it's because they express more.
Yeah.
And that's the case here. Like you need those big vacant circles.
Okay, and another question that's sort of dancing around the edges of this, but I want to. This movie, upon reflection, reminded me of Wings of Desire, the Wim Wenders film, because what I thought was fascinating about that movie, one of the many things, is that it seems to present life from the point of view of an angel.
Yes.
And how time, and again, time is different for an angel, because he's always going to be living and always, has lived, and so he doesn't have any highs and lows, and everything is sort of. Is that a comparable connection that you see with the ghost? Because it seems to me that in a lot of ways this movie is, from the ghost point of view, what life looks like from a ghostly point of view. And is it the same or is it the different point? I think Wenders' point is, a lot of it is, that life just is flat. That it just, when you're an angel, it's flat. And yet, your ghost, life seems anything but flat and unconnected. To him. What do you make with that comparison?
That's an amazing comparison. And to be honest, I literally bought Wings of Desire on Blu-ray like 3 weeks ago because I haven't seen it since high school. And so I haven't rewatched it yet, but I now own it, so I'm going to.
Perfect.
And I bought actually that entire Criterion box set of his movie, the Wim Wenders movies.
Yeah.
I think that is a tremendous comparison, because in our film the ghost is trying to react to things on a human level. And there are points in the movie where he clearly gets sad or angry. There's one where he gets very angry and tries to interact and have an effect. But I think, as the film goes on, the realization that doesn't matter and that he needs to let go. We're sort of like ironing out. He's ironing out existence and coming to terms with the fact that life is, in the grand scheme of things, a very smooth surface, like you described from the angel's perspective.
Yeah.
And so he's getting to that place. He doesn't get there by the end of the movie, but he's on his way there.
Okay. Oh, that's very good. Okay. So now let's just jump right into the ghost. What is it like to be a ghost?
I imagine it's pretty boring. I mean, to be honest, one of the ideas I had that kind of led to this movie was I thought it would be really funny to do a traditional scary movie like Poltergeist, and like basically remake Poltergeist, but have the ghost be a guy in a sheet, and just always, you always see him, and just make the movie as scary and as literally sincere as possible in terms of being a scary movie, but always have a guy in a sheet. And I was thinking about that, then you start to, as soon as you see the ghost, you start to, wonder, well, what's going on in that character's point of view and in their mind. And then you think, well, what's going on when there aren't people living in them? Like in Poltergeist, what were all the ghosts doing before the family moved in?
Yes.
And
that's your movie.
That's what this movie is, exactly. It's exactly what this movie is. And And if in Poltergeist, the house hadn't fallen into like some dimensional portal, then you would imagine, oh, well, then someone else would move in afterwards.
Yeah.
And once you start thinking about things from that perspective, it gives you an entirely new idea, a new insight into like what if ghosts do exist, which I believe they do, but if they do, if they are the spirits of people who are hanging around the earth, like that's probably not the best existence. You gotta scare people every now and then, or reach out and connect with people every now and then. The rest of the time, you're just waiting.
So when you do a movie that's this kind of, art housey,
Yeah.
do you actually work out a kind of cosmology of ghosts? Like
No.
No. Okay.
I mean, it's funny. We did kind of, initially shoot some material that like suggested rules, certain rules and like how things work. But we realized at a certain point, like this isn't the type of movie that needs that.
Yeah.
We don't need an entire scene establishing that he can't leave the house. The fact that we just never see him leave it is enough.
Yeah.
So no, we didn't, but we did think about it a little bit, and you just sort of follow, as you're cutting things together, just kind of figure out what the movie needs. And this was one that where we didn't need that much. And there's more suggestion in the movie that I don't even have answers for. Like, where's that portal that shows up in the wall go to? I don't know.
Yeah.
It felt like that was the right thing to happen at that moment.
Okay, so you mentioned how still the movie is, how little dialogue there is. It's not. There are scenes between Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck that before the ghost appears and all that. So it's not like it's completely esoteric. However, there is one crucial scene at a party being held in the house, and you've got one guy he's like a partier who is talking. It's the kind of BS philosophy that you often get when you're at a party and this guy's kind of drinking a bit. And yet, because there's so few words in the movie, they hold a lot of import. What is the point of that scene? What did you want to get across in that scene? Why is that scene there?
It's there for a number of reasons. One is to like sort of give audiences a breather. Like after having been through like an hour of mood, all of a sudden you get something very tactile that you can hold on to with that dialogue. The second thing is what he is saying is indeed the philosophies of a drunken poet at a party. It's kind of BS. Doesn't 100% add up. There's some contradictions in there, and yet at the same time, he's fumbling towards some kind of truth.
Yes.
And when I personally am trying to reconcile myself with my place in the universe, I go through trains of thought that include all of those things.
Sure.
And there are ideas expressed in that monologue of his that are ideas that have kept me up at night, wondering about where the world will where my movie's going to be in a billion years, like when the world's ending, like what will any of this have mattered? This film that I'm slaving over and losing sleep over right now, is that going to matter? So I do worry about these things, and so what that monologue was it is a guy fumbling towards some kind of truth. He's straining for it. He doesn't have the capacity to quite nail it, but he's reaching for something, and in that reaching, he sort of paves the way for both the ghost and the audience to go where the movie goes next.
Yes. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's obviously functional. I was wondering, just as kind of like a thought experiment or an aesthetic experiment, how would your movie work, or would it not work if we just took that scene out? In other words, that to me, it felt like it's about maybe 2/3 way through the movie, and it's something like, something the audience kind of grab onto to kind of try to make more sense of the movie. If that wasn't in there, would the movie have worked anyway? Because it seems to me that you've got a very powerful, dynamic movie, even without that kind of philosophical grasping. Do you think that it would have been a pure object of art if you hadn't had that in there?
I don't, but I do think it would have worked, and I know that because I tried it. I cut a version without it just to see what it would feel like, and it just felt a little too elusive. Like it was a little too liquidy, and it was hard to like really grab onto anything. So that scene, is helpful in terms of allowing you to just dig in for a second. Yeah. And without it, it kind of just slips through your fingers.
Yeah. Good point. And I do think in terms of pacing and just it's a different aspect of the movie, so you're much more alert to that because it's so out of character with everything else in the movie.
Exactly.
And then you reserve. Yeah. No, I think it's a great scene. Well, one of the philosophical thrusts of that scene is that like a lot of artists, people want to leave a legacy. How do you leave things behind? Clearly, that seems to have resonance with both our characters. The ghost is the ghost an artist? In that, is he there to actually leave a legacy, or is he there to kind of either bear witness or resolve his own issues?
I think it's the latter. I think he's resolving his own issues, and in the process, he's helping me resolve mine. I do think everything we do, as artists, is an extension of the ego. I also think it's important to kind of let go of one's ego. Like it does get you to places. It does help with certain things, but it's important to have the flexibility to let go of it. And so even in the film when Rooney is leaving a little note behind, that's an extension of one's ego. Like leaving a note for to say you've been somewhere, leaving like a trace of yourself. That's just your ego like demanding that you leave that behind. And so the ghost is dealing with the letting go of his own ego, subjecting his own ego to the ravages of time and realizing that it doesn't amount to that much in the long run.
Yeah, I clearly thought the philosophizing was in reference to the way the ghost is seeing the world, but I realized it actually is equally, if not more so, applicable to Rooney Mara's character, who in the dynamic between the two, he's the one who wants to stay in the house. He's the one who has a sense of history and loves the house. She's the one that wants to move on. He's the the composer who's listening, creating this kind of music, and yet her effort at leaving notes behind, she says. Biographically, one of the few biographical bits we get, that she moved around so much as a kid that she was in the habit of leaving little notes around in the houses. She says, in case she ever came back, there'd be a piece of her there. That in some ways, that's an artistic effort on her part.
Completely, she's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Like even though she's got like a more realistic outlook on the world or a more adult perspective, whatever you want to call it, less sentimental.
Yeah.
She's just as sentimental as Casey is.
Yeah.
She just is less outwardly so.
Perfect. Again, one of the things that is so... I don't know if it's only because there's so few distractions in the movie, but the music plays such a central role. Again, how did you determine the music? What kind of music were you after? And obviously you must be happy with the effect. It seems very ethereal in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And they're literal songs that show up and that both characters listen to at different times.
Yeah, I've worked with the same composer on all my movies, Daniel Hart, and he is one of those collaborators who I just trust implicitly, like Casey and Rooney, and who I can kind of just turn loose on the film and know that whatever he comes up with will work. In this case, there was one key difference, was that he had written this song called I Get Overwhelmed. And when I heard this song, he played it for me while he was writing the music of Pete's Dragon, I was overwhelmed by it. And I just couldn't get it out of my head, and I kept listening to it, and this was during the process of developing this movie and getting it ready to be filmed. And eventually I just wrote it into the script and then asked him if I could use it, and he said yes.
Yeah.
And that was a very key component of the film, because prior to that, Casey's character wasn't a musician, but all of a sudden I was like, okay, now I've got something for him to do, and this song will be kind of the heartbeat of the movie.
Yeah.
So that was really, a very key component to what the movie became. And then from there, when it came to writing the score, I knew obviously that there would be a lot of, quite a few number of scenes where there would be no music at all. There'd be long stretches where you wouldn't get anything on that level, on that sonic level, but that there would be plenty of other parts of the movie where we need that to kind of push things forward or keep the through line feeling consistent. And I showed Daniel the rough cut, and he started work, and then I showed him the other cuts as they came along, and he just started writing music. And I would give him like ideas, I would say like, oh, what if we did something that was similar to a John Carpenter 80s synth score, or what if we did something that was more choral or had elements of opera to it. And he would just take my ideas and either use them or discard them as he felt was whatever he felt was right, and I'm totally fine with that because he's the musician and I'm not.
Yeah.
And he started just delivering music, and we would drop it into the edit, and sometimes I'd ask him to make some changes. He did some stuff that was just too overtly scary, and I didn't feel that worked. And other times, I would change the movie to fit the music, and it was a very organic and concerted process between the two of us. But it was pretty late in the game. I think he wrote most of the score in December of last year, and the movie premiered in January. So it was a pretty I don't want to say a last minute effort, but it was the last step of the process.
Luckily, he'd already written that song.
The song was always going to be there.
Yeah.
And we hear it a couple more times in the film, and it's a really, it really does become kind of like the fulcrum of the story.
Okay, I'm assuming since the movie opens with this, that you don't mind talking about this Virginia Woolf quote.
Oh yeah.
This every time you wake up, a door is shutting. I love that. I don't know the context of why or when she wrote that, but again, related to your movie.
Well, it's funny because Virginia Woolf is one of my favorite authors. I mean, I've just been I've been so inspired by her ever since I first read Mrs. Dalloway, and so I've been thinking about her as I worked on this film because she does interesting things with time. Her book To the Lighthouse is a very famous jump, a massive jump in time where you've gotten completely caught up in the characters and what they're going through, and all of a sudden, decades have gone by.
Yeah.
And that was a big revelation for me as a reader that you could do that as a storyteller. And then her book Orlando is about a character who is literally, unaffected by time, who just consists in persisting through the ages. And I love the idea of someone being unstuck in time, which is to borrow Kurt Vonnegut's use of, that's what he said in Slaughterhouse-Five.
Right.
I love that phrasing, so I use it all the time. And so I was already thinking about Virginia Woolf a lot as I was working on this film, and I had this scene where some books get knocked off a bookshelf in traditional haunted house fashion, and I was like, it would be great if it was something, meaningful to me that got knocked off and that Rooney could read, and I wondered to myself, I wonder if Virginia Woolf has ever written anything about ghosts. And so I just did a quick Google search and realized not only has she written about ghosts, but she wrote a short story called A Haunted House. And I read it, and it's about two spirits who are, rushing through a house trying to grab hold of the things that matter to them in life and not knowing what those things are. And I literally felt like I was reading like an interpretation of the thoughts that were going on in my head related to this film. It just applied so thoroughly. So the quote at the beginning is right from the beginning of the story. It's the first line of the story. And it sets up exactly what happens in our film, because that's the first thing that happens, is a noise awakens them in the night. And then later when the book gets knocked off the shelf and Rooney's reading, you get little glimpses of it, a little almost too quick to read, but it was just one of those remarkable coincidences that I was looking for something that wound up fitting so perfectly.
That's very good. I'm getting the signal I got to wrap this up, but I have to ask you, a lot of sort of before anybody that I knew had seen the film, there were all these jokes about, you just took the guy who won the Oscar for Best Actor and put a bedsheet over him and cast him in your movie. How often is he in that bedsheet? Was he ever in that bedsheet, or was it always a stand-in?
No, he was definitely in it.
Is that right?
Yeah, he was definitely in it. We did, as we were shooting, there were, it's probably not a spoiler to say this, but there are scenes where he is in this scene along with the ghost at the same time. And we had our art director, David Pink, who was exactly the same height and build, and so he wore the sheet in those scenes, and then we realized we needed to do some pickups. So we ultimately shot more material without Casey, but he was thrilled to wear that sheet. He, I think, whether it's because he's a masochist or because he loves to, I think what he ultimately loved was the opportunity to act in a movie without having to be, show his face. That he got to preserve his cherished anonymity and yet at the same time be front and center in a film, and that was a wonderful opportunity for him.
The ideal role, and I just realized, I'm sorry, I just got to ask one question. The famous pie scene, that's referenced in there. Again, what were you after? To me, it felt like you were training, again, part of your training of the audience to look for what you're looking for, but it also fits psychologically. Talk about the significance of, is it a 5 or 7 minute pie eating scene?
The scene is 9 minutes, but that particular shot is 5. Or a little bit under 5 minutes. I wanted, I knew Rooney was going to be leaving the movie at a certain point. Like, she wasn't going to be in the entire film, and I knew that we had a limited amount of time to really identify with her as a character on her own, not being defined completely by Casey's character. And I also knew that, this is a movie where the lead character is wearing a sheet over his head for it. So there's something very distracting in every single frame, just by the nature of that. So I needed something that would kind of give the movie over to Rooney for a little bit. And at that point in the film, she's grieving, she's bereaved, and I wanted to find a way to convey that was memorable and that was emotional and guttural and kind of gets you in the stomach. And I just thought that if she could be doing something incredibly physical, like expressing her grief physically, that would be that was the way we should go, and eating just felt like the right thing, because that's something, in a way, a lot of times with actors and actresses, movie stars, you don't see them consume. That's a very private act.
Yeah.
It's a very private act, and so for her to like expose that side of herself, I felt that would be one of those things that not only would be a memorable scene in the movie, but also a really profound expression of whatever we wanted her to express, which in this case was grief.
Yeah, perfect. Again, in case you haven't, you can't tell, I really liked your movie.
I'm so glad. This has been a fantastic. You asked me early on if I like talking about it, and this has been a wonderful. I've really enjoyed talking about it today.